Something happened this week that I want to name directly. Elon Musk, from his phone, helped to mobilise riots in Belfast. He shared protest locations. He retweeted calls for people to take to the streets. He has hundreds of millions of followers and an algorithm designed to make his content spread fast. He got to set the narrative. This is the information environment we're living in, and it's why independent media is not a nice to have. Over the Top, Under the Radar is our attempt to do something different. We take the week's stories seriously, we do the research, and we give you the context that helps you to make sense of what's actually happening rather than what a billionaire with a political agenda wants you to think. We're Patreon supported, and that means we answer to you and nobody else. If you listen regularly and you find the show useful, please consider becoming a supporter today. It's the best way to keep us going. Patreon.com/Over the Top, Under the Radar. Thank you. I'm Carys.
I'm Pat Younge.
We're on a mission to make sense of the news by asking why the media obsesses over some stories, ignores others, and is a degree a waste of money.
This is Over the Top, Under the Radar.
Welcome back. Our co-host this week is Pat Younge. Pat is a former Chief Creative Officer for BBC. He's a former president of US cable network, the Travel Channel, and he served on the board of ITV Studios. I think of him as a media guru. He's chair of the Council of Cardiff University, and he's also one of the founding members of the Over Under podcast and a stalwart of the Over Under WhatsApp community. Thanks for coming back, Pat.
Good to see you, Carys. Congrats on 100 episodes. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, we reached 100 episodes, which feels really bananas.
It's a real landmark.
Did you think 2 years ago that we'd still be going?
I hoped we'd still be going. You know, there was no money, but I hoped we'd still be going. And it's amazing that you've managed to keep it going sort of 12 months on from when Gary stepped away. So congrats. Well done to you.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's thanks to you and to everyone who has donated on Patreon that's listening. So what have you been up to, Pat, in your role as media guru? What's been happening?
In my role as media guru, well, most recently I gave evidence to a House of Commons Select Committee on the future of the BBC. And I had one little clip that sort of went semi-viral about pointing out that there are now 6 men, all American, who own or control most of the way in which media is discovered, shared and consumed in the UK. And that's why we need a BBC. That was my message. And it seems to have struck a chord.
Yeah, and I think you were on the show a few months ago talking about the BBC when they were mired in one of the many scandals. I think it was when Trump was suing. Yeah, the last scandal when Trump was threatening to, and I mean, did sue the BBC. I think, yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? It's like a national pastime to criticize the BBC, but when you put it in that context, it is a real asset and a real thing to be protected, even though it isn't perfect and lots of people have criticisms.
It is imperfect, but look at what's happened in the 60 Minutes. And ask yourself, is that how you want your news to be delivered to you?
So, I mean, you've worked at the BBC, you've worked at a lot of other media companies. Are you feeling optimistic or pessimistic about the future of media right now, given what you said about,
I'm a natural optimist. I say to people, if you think where our forebearers came from and what they went through, every day is a blessing. So I'm a natural optimist. And I'm optimistic on the BBC, partly because I think the message is getting through. That for all of its imperfections, leaving all of this to the marketplace and to the algorithm doesn't work for any of us, apart from the most powerful. So I am an optimist, even though the industry is consolidating and we are facing oligarchy. The BBC is more popular than ever.
Well, Pat and I have both taken a look at the news agenda, and we have each picked one story we think the media has gone over the top on and one that we think has flown under the radar and not been talked about enough. My over the top of the week, very aptly, given what we've been talking about, is Elon Musk. So we're recording this show on a Wednesday, 2 days after a knife attack in Belfast, which led to Elon Musk and the far right and the usual gang of grifters calling for anti-immigration protests on the streets of Belfast. Cars were set on fire last night in Belfast and parts of the UK. And I don't think that this story is over the top. I don't think you can talk too much about violence and unrest on our streets. Elon Musk is obviously a central figure to this. And I think that some of the ways we're talking about him are kind of missing the importance of what his role is. So just in case you haven't been following Elon Musk on X, The Guardian has found that he posts about race every single day. I think you can guess the content of what he's posting. And after the attack in North Belfast, when lots of rumours were circulating on social media, Musk posted that people should take to the streets. He also posted different locations for protests. And so the content of what he posted is concerning, and the media should be covering it. But I guess the thing that I've been thinking about, and you covered it in the intro a bit, Pat, is that yes, Elon Musk is a significant figure, but the power that he has in this moment and other moments isn't really about things that he posts on his platform. The power is that when he bought X, formerly known as Twitter, a couple of years ago, he gave a platform to a lot of far-right figures that previously were not able to be on social media. So Tommy Robinson, well, the man known as Tommy Robinson, actually known as Stephen Yaxley Lennon, was allowed to come back to X. He'd been banned from most social media platforms. And Rupert Lowe, who is the even further right than Reform MP for Great Yarmouth, who runs a party called Restore, is a particular pal of Elon Musk, and a Sky News investigation that we can link to found that people who use X get Rupert Lowe's content more than like any other politician. So basically, Elon Musk bought a social media platform and he's using it to elevate the opinions of people on the far right. And that structurally is much more important than anything that Elon Musk happens to post when he wakes up and decides to do a racism. So that's why he's my over. I mean, we've talked about this already, Pat. You're really across media ownership. Like, what have you thought about how the Belfast riots have been covered?
Yeah, I'm over Elon Musk as the richest man in the world, and I'm over Elon Musk and SpaceX and all of that stuff. Because to me, the story about Musk that nobody really talks about is the one that you've just raised, which is how that he is using this platform, not just to promote the far right, but also to provoke this sort of nationalist and nativist sort of point of view. If you look at the Henry Novak case, I think he tweeted or retweeted about 200 times. And the thing is, because of the volume of followers that he has, that automatically shifts the algorithm. That automatically elevates its importance. So his tweets aren't worth what one of my tweets would have been when I was on that platform. I left it because it became a cesspit. His tweets actually shift the algorithm and therefore make that stuff more prominent, more available, more visible to everybody else on the platform who then read it, which also then helps shift it further up the algorithm. So we shouldn't look at what he's doing as he's one of many in this world of individual free speech. He is the algorithm, effectively. And so when he tweets, he moves the whole platform. And it isn't just him, it is the people that he has chosen to foreground. There is a bigger right-wing project going on that we never talk about. So Pete Hegseth, the Fox News contributor, so-called Secretary of Defense or War, depending on where you sit, he goes to D-Day in Normandy and uses that moment, which is about venerating those people who served and paid the ultimate sacrifice for everybody's freedom, to condemn Western European governments over immigration. J.D. Vance uses the platform to condemn British and European governments over not protecting civilization. This is a project. This is a real project. And they are using every platform at their disposal and every moment that they can get to articulate their project. And we need to sort of start responding.
Yeah, and I think you've pulled it together really well there, and it's not a coincidence that Tommy Robinson was not able to join the protest in Belfast because he is in Russia meeting Elon Musk's dad. So, I mean, a lot of this is in plain sight, these kind of far right actors, like white supremacists. I think the other thing I wanted to talk about that, I know you'll know from firsthand from working in the media is the power. Like, there is a reason that all of these wealthy men buy up media outlets. Human beings are social animals, and our media and our social media like make sense of the world and tell us what is real. And there are so many studies into this, and it's one of the many reasons that it's so dangerous how our social media platforms work and what they amplify. But platforms like X give us social proof, they make us look at the world and tell us what's normal and acceptable. And Elon Musk has bought X and hijacked it for a far right agenda to say it is normal and acceptable to say that all black and brown people are criminals, that they aren't really from the country that they live in, that they should be deported, that they should be burned in their homes. And, none of us are immune to this. All of the studies show that, like, social proof doesn't just mobilize people who are already radicalized, it moves the middle, it moves the Overton window. Even if we come off X, what is happening on X and the way that it amplifies extreme voices, the way that the mainstream media then reports on it, like that has an impact. And we've seen the impact on our streets. We're now in the third year in the UK and Ireland of far right protests, violent protests at the concept of immigration, at apparently anger at violence towards women, violence committed by black and brown people. But like we are seeing in real time, and I really want to talk to you about it, Pat, because we're coming from slightly different generations, but I can't think of anything like this within my lifetime, anything so sort of vocal and confident and scary. And I think understanding the way that Musk is turbocharging extreme views and like pumping them into the mainstream is really important because we can see the consequences. Like, is it too much hyperbole?
No, in the 1970s, the NF tried to burn people out of their houses, particularly Asians, but not just Asians. But they didn't have the social credibility of a platform, and they didn't have the money behind them to help them organize and mobilize. I think what's interesting is if you look at these platforms, what was the big thing that Zuckerberg did? Get rid of fact checkers. We are a free speech platform. Trump actually put fact checkers on a list of occupations who shouldn't get visas. In fact, they're trying to expel for the United States a couple of people who are involved in systematic fact checking online. And I think we've reached a point where we can't just pretend. Remember the early days of MySpace and YouTube? Oh, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Isn't this great? We can all be creative. We can all share our work with the entire world. And people said, oh, these aren't publishing platforms. These are just platforms on which people publish. Well, I think we have to do with these guys what you do with the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, and what you do with the newspapers is they need to be regulated. And if you put something up there which isn't factually accurate or which does foment unrest, then the owners of the platforms need to be held accountable. Starmer needs to grow a pair and we need to act. And actually, the public will be with him because this isn't free speech. This is an abuse of power. That's actually what we're dealing with. And we need to treat it because if Labour get out of it, they'll never get back in unless they address this environment.
Yeah, and it's not to say everything is perfect with our broadcast media. I'm sure we could both reel off examples of ways that it doesn't work, but it does seem completely bananas that there can be companies and individuals that are making money from extreme content, from sowing division, from sowing unrest, that have fewer restrictions, that have like no skin in the game. Elon Musk can tell people to take to the streets of Belfast or Southampton, safe in the knowledge that they will come nowhere near his mansion. Like this man has no skin in the game, but he's permanently stirring the pot and kind of poking the far right bear. And there are no restrictions on him and what he says. And you're right, it's very, it's Keir Starmer in all of these moments generally seems lacking. But
I think it's more than Starmer. I think, where are the trade unions on this? Where is civic society on this? It's easy to personalise it and say, oh, Starmer, he's an Arsenal supporter. He's from Islington, he eats tofu, he's very weak. It's more than that. Our institutions are being hollowed out. We need our organisations to take a stand because that's how you move things.
Yeah, I guess I also want to talk about something that I think the media aren't talking about enough, which is a lot of the violence in Belfast was targeted towards black and brown people and people who were not born in the UK, a Ukrainian woman who's scared in her home, families like threatened with violence. And I think another story that the media isn't telling is that like for a lot of us, we feel a lot less safe right now, and we are less safe. And I think it's important to name that and to say that, in a world where our politicians can't be counted on, and when the people that own large media networks are actively hostile, it's important to name that like we have to have each other's back and we have to support one another. And probably, you know, we also have to take to the streets and say that they don't belong to racists. And I kind of wanted to name that because I know it's absolutely terrifying. Last week we recorded the show and two men spoke to me on the street. I thought they were asking for money. They actually started talking to me about the riots and saying, was I ready for the riots? And that kind of uptick in hostility for people of colour is real. And yeah, it's something we've got to be paying attention to.
My over the top, and let me declare an interest here. I chair a major university. I chair Cardiff University. And what I'm talking about here isn't specific to Cardiff. I'm talking about universities in general. And my over top is about the systematic sort of rubbishing of the value proposition of going to university. Every time you pick up a paper now, you've got this person or that person or this poll or that poll saying going to university isn't worth the money. Now, all right, I went to the university in the 1980s. I know that makes me a dinosaur. We didn't have to pay fees. But going to university changed my life. And I do graduation every year. And I talk to students, and all of them will tell you how going to university has changed their life. It doesn't mean that going to university hasn't changed. It has. But there was a poll last week that said only a third of Britons believe a degree is worth the time or the money. Now, in 2005, only 14%, so 1 in 7, would say that going to university wasn't worth the time or the money. And now that's up to 34%. So a third of people say going to university isn't worth the time or the money. And when they were asked, do people who go to university end up financially better off? 2005, they said 50%. Now that's down to a third. So the whole value proposition of going to university financially and in terms of a good use of your time and money is under challenge. And I think that's a problem because universities are one of the main mechanisms for social mobility. They're not the only one. Yes, apprenticeships, yes, work. But university, especially for working class kids, gives them opportunities and access to networks and individuals and experiences that you just don't get anywhere else. There was a poll of students in 2025 from YouGov. 80% of students were satisfied with the provision. 78% thought it would benefit them. A clear majority think they'd be better off and get a good job. But only 2/3 think it's value for money. And that brings me to tuition fees, because I do think tuition fees are the problem. Tuition fees, which the current mechanism introduced in 2006, it was only £3,000 then, and the state actually paid the bulk of the rest of tuition. Now it's at 9,000. And I think what's happened in that shift is we've done three things. First of all, we've priced some people psychologically out of university. I wouldn't have gone to university if I thought I had to pay. I would have a loan of 30, 40, 50,000 pounds. I just wouldn't have done it. Because why? Because, my family, we didn't own our house. We rented our house. I had no experience of borrowing significant amounts of money, and no one in my family did. But the other two challenges are that, first of all, this tuition fee has put the entire burden of the funding of universities, or pretty much the bulk of the burden, directly onto students, which psychologically says you individually personally benefit, so you individually personally should pay. But I don't believe students are the sole beneficiaries of going to university, and I don't believe that the benefit that you get is purely financial. I think we all benefit from having a better educated populace. I think we all benefit from having people who are happier and more content. And all the evidence is, if you go to university over your career or your lifetime, you still end up relatively better paid, and you still have relatively better mental and physical health outcomes. But we have atomized the benefits of university to the individual. And I think that is a societal problem. It is a societal benefit, and it should be society that picks up the tab. The third problem is that because the money comes with the student, it's like a dowry almost, you've turned the system into a market with universities competing with each other to attract students. And at some point, for some universities, that becomes a volume play, not a quality play. And so I think the whole tuition fee system has to be reviewed because it is leading to perverse outcomes. And at a time when we need more better educated, more intellectually satisfied individuals in our country, we're actually making it harder and harder and harder for them to get that unless they're from rich and middle class backgrounds.
I mean, yeah, it's a good over in the sense of it's such a striking shift in such a short amount of time in terms of how many people now don't believe a degree is worth it. And I think you touched on really well. Two things are happening, right? And you went to university in the 80s. I went to university in the noughties. I was the lucky end of the people that had to pay for university. I had a student loan. I had fees that I had to pay, but I've paid off my student loan. My fees were less than £2,000 a year. Now they're £9,000 a year. The interest on my loan was pretty low. As soon as I started earning money, I could start paying it down. And I happened to study economics. And one of the things that we did in economics was whether it made sense to have top-up fees or a graduate tax. And I think there are two things happening, right? There's something real, which is the cost benefit of university has completely changed. You know, leaving with £50,000 of debt, paying so much more for your higher education does make you think, is it worth it? And does mean that, especially, you know, all the data shows that if you come from a lower income, you know, I grew up in social housing, similarly to you, people who are more debt averse are people who kind of can't afford to have debt. And so all of the studies showed before we brought in top-up fees that working class kids would be put off from university if it was made more expensive. Yeah, another of New Labour's not so greatest hits. And there were other ways to do this. We could have had a graduate tax. We could have said that people who benefit from university pay back once they're on a higher income. But so there's something real happening, which is for young people now, life is so much harder. It's harder to, you know, have a home that's affordable. It's harder to get a job that pays well and has opportunities. And so then that cost benefit of university that is way more expensive. But I mean, I thought the other thing you said as well of this, like what it means once something becomes commodified. And, you know, I don't know what it was like to go to university with a grant, but that sense of being invested in by the country and like the country's investing in you because they believe that you're going to pay it back. And it isn't in a kind of, as you say, like commodity, this costs this, I'm paying that, what do you get back? It's just a sense of it's important for you to learn, it's important for you to develop. And we as a nation are going to, we're going to pay into you, we're going to invest in you. We think you're a good prospect. And I think that stuff is harder to quantify, right? Like, what does that mean for young people when we say to them, you're not worth that bet. You need to pay us up front if you want to benefit from this. Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, you're involved in higher education and Cardiff University. Like, what would you say to young people now who just think it's not worth it?
I say go. And I sponsor every year. I make an award to my state school that I went to, a pupil premium pupil. So normally somebody who's on free school meals who is going into the sixth form. One of them a year gets £500 a year for 2 years so that they can do things like go to open days or get a computer or do something to help them as they try to get into higher education, because I believe it is that valuable. You know, I've had to sit down with my own kids and they said, well, what about this debt? And, you know, because I'm comfortably sort of middle class, I can say, don't worry, because actually you don't pay it off unless you earn this much. And if you were going to get a mortgage, it's not factored into it. I know my way around, you know, I'm financially aware, I can advise them. But a lot of people, it's just debt. And we are going through, I mean, this is one of the key, this intergenerational transfer of wealth from the young to the middle-aged and the old is a real problem. You know, so we went for free, they've got these massive debts. Yeah, people complain that they put up the minimum wage for young people, but we've got triple locked pensions. You know, there is an intergenerational wealth transfer going on, which is going to hold this country back so much, because it is so difficult for now for young people to see their way through.
My under the radar is David Stroud. David Stroud is a 44-year-old man from Dartford in Kent who has been the first person to be convicted under a new section of the Public Order Act. David Stroud was on the train with a woman who was alone. He made a series of inappropriate comments to her. He grabbed her hair and asked if he could kiss her. He has been sentenced to 12 months of community service. This has flown under the radar, but it's really important for us to talk about because David Stroud had a history of harassing women. He had stalked a woman for 22 months. And in a time where people like Elon Musk and on the far right tell us that they care about violence against women and girls, actual instances of violence and actual perpetrators too frequently aren't talked about. In 2024, the National Police Chiefs Council said that violence against women and girls was a national emergency. All the stats show that violence against women and girls is incredibly prevalent, is, if anything, getting worse and impacts women of all ages, of all races, of all classes. And yet the media still doesn't talk about it. And when it does talk about it, it talks in a really problematic way. The first headline of the BBC story about David Stroud kind of suggested that what he did was just banter, really underplayed the violent nature of his crime. Luckily, they did change that headline, but I think it's just another example of how, for so many of us, the expectation is that we are a public commodity. We can be harassed. People can come on to us even if we don't want it to happen. So we need to talk more about David Stroud, and we need to talk more about the culture that allows people like David Stroud to think that they're entitled to women's bodies. Had you seen the case? Flown under your radar?
I was trying to Google it in real time as you were talking. And as I Googled it, I remember I did hear something about it on the news last night. I am always struck. Well, first of all, it does show the power of campaigning. I mean, I think sometimes we can all believe we're too powerless, but the fact that this law exists came as a result of a campaign, a sustained campaign, and yet violence against women isn't taken anywhere near as seriously as it should be. I'm glad that that law exists. I think there's also something about, what should we do when we are in those situations, as a not just bystander training, but I mean, one of the things that has changed over time is members of the public tend not to intervene. People, I don't know if they're scared of knives or drugs or whatever, but these things just tend to run and run and run. So, one, I'm glad there is a law that seems to be effective, but we need to make people, including people like me, aware that the law exists and how to use it.
Yeah. And I think, I think the woman was alone in the train carriage, but this point about bystanders and people acting. So what actually happened was this man was harassing a woman on the train in the evening, and she was on the phone to her boyfriend, and he called British Transport Police, and they were able to apprehend David Stroud. I think the other thing that it's worth mentioning is David Stroud has previous for stalking women. Like, David Stroud was on bail after admitting to a 22-month stalking campaign. So this is a man who's a repeat offender. This is a man who doesn't believe women have a right to be safe and to consent to being sort of touched or talked to. It just, for me, just feels so telling that this man who is a danger to women has committed this crime, has potentially committed other crimes, and all of the so-called champions of women's rights and women's safety and women's liberty are quiet because he's white. And the world, the country, the place that people like Elon Musk and Tommy Robinson want to create is not a place where women are safe. It is a place where white men can do what they like and people of color can't. And I think that as you say, it's a huge testament to these campaigners and the women's sector for seeing an issue with the law, seeing a gap in the law and saying we need to do something about it. There are more cases being brought to trial now that this is an offence. But yeah, I think it's also interesting what people get angry about and whose crime tells a bigger story. David Stroud's crime does tell us a bigger story. It's the story of a society where, women can expect to be groped or touched or harassed just because a man's had a few drinks, and we're meant to shake it off as banter. And anyone listening, or many people listening, will have had that experience from when they were a teenage girl or potentially even younger. And yeah, I think it's worth us talking about and worth us lifting up, especially when women's safety is so weaponized.
My under the radar is the Football World Cup. We are
say more.
2 days away. We're 2 days away from the start of the World Cup. I was just in my local supermarket. England are qualified, Scotland are qualified, There is no bunting. There is no World Cup fever. There isn't even an English World Cup song. You know, I remember the songs going all the way back to the 1970s. Back Home, Three Lions, World in Motion. Vindaloo, there is no World Cup song. So this World Cup being under the radar is a real problem. I bought my son a flip chart and he couldn't have been less impressed. I bought him a wall chart with all of the teams and all of the games, and it was like a sort of, yeah. Whereas for me, that was everything. You know, it's the World Cup. But it isn't just the fact that it is sort of under the radar and no one's talking about it, and there's no visible evidence that Britain have qualified. Scotland may be slightly more different because they qualify less often. It's also what the stories around the World Cup, which aren't really being reported. So just last few days, a Somalian referee, Omar Arton, who is the best referee in Africa. He was the African Football Federation's Referee of the Year, had been selected for his first World Cup. He gets off his plane, he's held in a cell, and then he's deported with no reason given. After 12 hours in the cell, he's deported. He will not take part in the World Cup. Question for me, why are the other referees not standing up in solidarity with this guy? You know, the Senegal and Uzbekistan teams, when they arrived in America, there was video of this on various social platforms. As they got down from the plane on the tarmac, the American border patrols were there with the metal detectors and wands, and they wanded these guys down on the tarmac and went through their bags as if they were criminals or people they want to send to El Salvador. Iran had to move all right, there's a war going on between America and Iran. They've had to move their base from, I think, Arizona into Mexico. But not only that, they've been told that they've only get 24-hour visas for their games. So they have to fly in, play, and go within 24 hours, which is obviously not designed to help them in terms of performance. And now FIFA have cancelled all of the Iranian ticket allocation. So every country that competes gets 8% of the tickets for a game. And FIFA has cancelled Iran's ticket allocation, which means that Iranian Americans and people from the rest of the world who got Iranian backgrounds, who bought flights and hotels to go and watch their team, are now being told their tickets are null and void. So they can't go. 25% of fans live in countries which have got visa restrictions. No African countries qualify for ESTAs, so they've got more expensive restrictions. If you're from Haiti, Senegal, or Ivory Coast, you can't go. You can't get a visa at all. And it's just, and then that's before you get onto the dynamic pricing of tickets, which means most tickets aren't affordable, and you've got to pay $100 to get from New York City to New Jersey if you're going to games there. So it's invisible. And maybe it's a good thing it's invisible, because underneath that, it's a cluster. And there is a racial dimension to what's going on. And this is before the fans get there. And this is before I start hovering around outside of stadium and start trying to lift people in real time. This thing is turning into some sort of dystopia. It's a nightmare.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It's kind of, you know, we've talked on the other weeks on the show about how corrupt and awful FIFA is. And obviously, this is a World Cup being hosted by the US, Canada, and Mexico, with a lot of games in the US. Kind of feels like when racism and capitalism are on steroids, this is what you get, like a really expensive World Cup where half the people that should be there can't even get into the country legally. Tickets are insanely expensive and like the vibes are bad. And you're right, what happened to the World Cup wall chart and like the pull-out posters? And I mean, I do have to say, obviously, I would, you know, my mother would be very upset if I didn't say not all of the nations are in the World Cup. Wales did not qualify this year. It's only England and Scotland. Ghana did qualify though, so that's very exciting. But yeah, it does feel like terrible vibes. It feels like we haven't got the normal World Cup fever, and yeah, it's just like, it's normally just a fun spectacle, isn't it? I don't know. I don't work in an office.
It's not fun if it's a really bad taste to them. I'm looking at Qatar thinking, wow, they were really progressive. You know?
It really says something when you're looking back at the Qatar World Cup with nostalgia.
And you got to remember, in 2028, They got the Olympics.
He won't be. Will he be president then? Or it'll be in the handover.
He will.
Yeah, he'll still be president. Yeah, I mean,
He will be president.
this is the bigger point, and you're right to bring it, Pat. Like, racism is awful. It makes us less safe. It's horrible. And it's divisive, but it's also incredibly bad vibes. I guess the real question is, could we put on our own World Cup that was not just driven by money and that was better vibes? I'm thinking about the Met Gala that Jeff Bezos was involved in and the New Yorkers who put on an alternative fashion show. Maybe the future is like not FIFA. It's a great under. Thank you, Pat, for coming on the show. Where can people find you and your work?
You can find me on most social media platforms other than X. If you sign up on Patreon, you can also engage with me fairly frequently in our fantastic over under WhatsApp community. And if you've got nothing else to do, you can find me at patrickyoung.com.
Thanks, Pat. And yeah, just to put a plug in, Pat is one of our many Patreon supporters, and he is very active in the Over Under WhatsApp community, which is where you can continue the conversations between shows. So if you sign up to support us on Patreon, patreon.com/over the top under the radar, you can join the WhatsApp group too and get to know Pat a bit better.